Hello and welcome to Israel Update. I'm Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv, and as usual, Mike Doran is in his office with a picture of Ben-Gurion in the background at the Hudson Institute. Mike, shalom.
Hello, Professor Taub.
It's getting worse. It's getting worse by the minute. Today, what's on everybody's mind is, of course, how and if the war will continue. As we speak, Blinken is here in Israel. It's not a little strange that, it is strange that by the standards of other countries, that he's sitting with the Israeli cabinet. And we'll see what's up with that and ask what the United States is up to. Henry Kissinger has died. Both Mike and I were very interested in the works of Kissinger. Mike just almost interviewed him a week or 2 weeks before his death, and you'll tell us about it. Also on this program, the intelligence failure. Israel is beginning to ask itself and ask its military and ask its security apparatuses, how was it that such a huge operation caught us so unprepared? We have some translated footage from Israeli sources for you on that. And then at the end, there'll also be 2 picks, mine and Mike's, for the dumbest take on the news this week. But first, as always, the news bulletin. Mike, over to you.
So good morning, Gadi. We have at the top of the news, there was an attack in Jerusalem. 3 people were killed and 6 others were wounded in a terrorist attack at the entrance to Jerusalem. 3 of the wounded are in serious condition. The 2 terrorists were brothers from East Jerusalem, and their victims were a 24-year-old woman, a 60-year-old woman, and a 73-year-old man. They were armed with an M16 and a pistol, and they are affiliated with Hamas, of course. The second item here is a pause in the fighting. The ceasefire is going to be extended by another day. It was supposed to end this morning, Thursday morning, the 30th, but it's going to be extended for another day. And this is because Israel has confirmed that a list from Hamas of 6 women and 2 children, Hamas put forward a list of 6 women and 2 children. The Israeli demand was that there should be 10 a day, but what they are counting 2 that Hamas released yesterday as a gesture to Russia as part of the 10. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Jerusalem today, and he said during a meeting with President Herzog, that the U.S. supports Israel's right to self-defense. This process is producing results. He said it's important, and we hope that it will continue. At the same time, I look forward to a detailed conversation with the government of Israel about the way ahead in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu told Secretary Blinken that nothing is going to stop Israel. Israel is going to press forward until victory. Now, there's one last item here, Gadi, I want to tell you about. Prime Minister Netanyahu met yesterday with local government officials from southern Israel. That's from the area around Gaza. Israel Today, the newspaper, obtained a recording of the remarks at the meeting, which are very interesting for our discussion. Netanyahu said, and this is a direct quote, "We need 3 things from the United States: munitions, munitions, and munitions. There are huge demonstrations in Western capitals and pressure within the United States, and I've been applying diplomatic pressure, and I've been giving interviews to networks there. Elon Musk, that's why we brought him to Israel. We need to apply counter pressure because counter pressure is being applied to our friend, President Biden. The diplomatic maneuvering room is for the IDF and the GSS to be able to go in there and to destroy Hamas. That hasn't come easily. There have been disagreements with the best of our friends." End of quote. You and I will unpack this a little bit further, but over to you right now.
Yeah, so we should begin, I guess, by asking, is the United States limiting Israel's room of maneuver so much that it would be hard, if not impossible, to win this war? I'll point out just 2 things. the Americans officials are emphasizing the humanitarian aid that should keep flowing, and we know humanitarian aid is controlled by Hamas. Fuel is not necessarily humanitarian aid. That's what keeps the tunnels going. So we're basically letting Hamas, if not exactly rearm, we're letting them reorganize and keep their equipment running and keep their ability of fighting through the tunnels with the so-called humanitarian aid. And secondly, the idea or the instruction that Israel should refrain as much as possible from civilian deaths. Now, that's of course completely impossible. What this means, and we have seen it, is that we are limiting the use of the Air Force and therefore putting our soldiers at greater risk. So in order to save civilian lives forced by Hamas or volunteering to be Hamas's human shields, we are risking the lives of our own soldiers. So is the United States gradually moving to just stop the IDF's war machine before we can achieve victory, Mike?
Well, there are people who are suggesting that. You probably saw this article by Carolyn Glick in the JNS.
Yeah.
Carolyn Glick, whom we had on the podcast here. What do we call this? A podcast, a broadcast? What is this? What do we have?
Let's call it a show for now, and let's see what happens.
Show. We had her on our show. It sounds quite well produced, this show. Anyway, she suggested that, citing retired General Brick, saying that the Israelis are totally dependent on the United States for munitions. And that's why I found this statement by Prime Minister Netanyahu interesting, that he's saying, we're saying three things to the Americans: munitions, munitions, and munitions. So there's a suggestion out there that the Americans are also withholding munitions, in particular heavy bombs that could be used in Gaza. I don't think the Americans are trying to shut this down. By the way, I would add to your list. You said humanitarian, avoid killing civilians, and humanitarian assistance. The Americans are also beginning to press Israel significantly on what comes after the war, the political front, and they're pushing revitalization of the Palestinian Authority. I suspect that this is not part of an effort to actually shut down the war effort. The Biden administration has got a progressive base that doesn't like Israel, doesn't like this war, does want to shut it down. On the other hand, the Biden administration understands the strategic imperative of defeating Hamas, and it understands that the Israeli governments are under an imperative from their own population. And I say governments because it doesn't matter, even if Netanyahu were to fall tomorrow, if it was a Gantz government, there would be the same imperative to destroy Hamas. I think the Americans realize that. So they're balancing the two, but in the end, they're allowing Israel to go forward with the war. And I expect that this will go forward to victory.
So if now the population is concentrated on the south, and Hamas has been reorganizing, so it's going to be more difficult. So we have more people in the south, a stricter prohibition on killing civilians, control of the munitions that we will be allowed or to have or not allowed to have, and a reinvigorated, not Palestinian Authority, but a reinvigorated Hamas, because we are supplying them with humanitarian aid. Let me suggest to you another interpretation in which the American policy is less sophisticated than you suggest. I think they are currently very comfortable with concentrating only on the hostages, because that's a human rights issue. That's the progressive wing. It's harder for the progressive wing to attack them on that, and they're using this to bring on a ceasefire. If they go for an attempt to force Israel into a deal of all hostages in return for permanent ceasefire, that is losing the war, that would best cater to their understanding of their electorate base. Am I wrong?
Well, yeah, but there's reality that gets in the way, because
That's the problem. I
there
forgot about that one.
there's not an unlimited number of hostages to use to prolong the ceasefire. Very quickly, you move from women and children to men, and then from there to men in uniform, and Hamas will demand a huge number of terrorists to be released from Israeli jails that Israel politically cannot release under the current circumstances. There cannot be another Shalit deal where someone like where next year's Yahya Sinwar gets released. Israeli public won't accept that.
So will the United States moderate its demands, or are we heading for a collision between Israel and the United States?
There's going to be a resumption of fighting, and there's going to be negotiation with the Americans amidst the fighting, just like we have seen in the past. The next round of negotiations with the Americans is going to be more intensive. There's going to be more friction than the past round, but the fighting will continue. It's going to intensify because we have starting. Is it today or tomorrow? I think it's today. Everyone is starting to converge on the United Arab Emirates. I think, including President Herzog of Israel, if I'm not mistaken, are going to the UAE for the COP28. This is the climate change conference. But what that is going to double as the climate change conference and the international conference on Gaza. Top-level American officials, including Blinken, possibly even President Biden, are going to show up there. And it's a kind of one-stop shop. You don't have to go all around the Middle East to talk to every foreign minister, every head of state. They'll all go there to the UAE. The Europeans, the East Asians, the Arabs, they'll all be there, and they'll all be talking Gaza. They'll be talking about two things: climate change and Gaza. And that's going to put pressure on the Americans to put pressure on the Israelis about the humanitarian crisis, all the things that you mentioned.
Which I'm sure the issues converge, because according to Judith Butler, I think Hamas is on the side of climate restrainment policy. I think
Judith Butler and what's her name from Sweden?
Greta Thunberg. Yeah. Judith Butler Judith Butler said that Hamas and Hezbollah should be understood as part of the world progressive left.
Absolutely.
That shows that if you use terminology that's academic enough, you can completely blind yourself to what you mentioned before, Mike, which is reality. In reality, Henry Kissinger passed away. Some people thought that would not happen, that he was just immune. But it's a sad thing. Both you and I were very much interested in Kissinger, and you recently wrote a piece about his intervention in the Yom Kippur War, and it's interesting because we're now talking about American supply of munition. That was the issue at Yom Kippur. Why don't you tell us about your discovery of how Golda Meir, then Prime Minister of Israel, explained why Israel did not preempt Egypt and Syria in 1973?
Right. So as you mentioned, I just wrote an article called "The Hidden Calculation Behind the Yom Kippur War," which came out in Mosaic magazine. I discovered that. I'm not the only one who knew it.
Put a link to the article under the video, just for our.
Oh, we'll do that. Okay, we'll link to it. Yeah, everyone should read it. It's only 10,000 words.
Yeah, and we'll check. We'll check if you read it or not. So
we will, and there will be a test.
Exactly.
The key issue is that the Americans in 1970, at the end of the war of attrition between Israel and Egypt, the Nixon administration, Kissinger and Nixon, promised Israel a qualitative military edge if they would be restrained in their attitude toward Egypt. At that time, it was Egypt backed by the Soviet Union, and Egypt and the Soviet Union supporting the PLO, which was a terrorist organization. So the Palestinians were playing the same way that we the same kind of configuration today. Iran, Iran, Hamas against Israel and the United States. So I'm ignoring what you said about the PLO and the Palestinian Authority. Anyway, the Americans, when the Israelis got intelligence showing that Egypt and Syria were about to attack them in 73, a surprise attack. First of all, Israeli intelligence ignored all of the signs, which were overwhelming, just like we're going to talk about today, just like now. But then there still were a few hours that the Israelis had when they knew that the attack was coming. And they had to make a decision about whether to launch a preemptive strike like they did in 1967. And they decided not to, because they thought it would endanger resupply from the Americans, because they had this deal from 1970 of QME in return for restraint.
QME, qualitative
military, that Israel's military will have a qualitative advantage over any conceivable coalition against it. And so you have this issue of resupply and support from America, and it comes up again. It comes up again in the middle of the war, because the Soviets were the war was a kind of a proxy war for NATO versus the Soviet Union. So the largest tank battle since World War II, and it was chewing up armor and men at an incredible rate, armor, ammunition, and men at an incredible rate. And the Americans were slow to resupply. The Soviets resupplied the Egyptians and the Syrians very quickly. The Americans dragged their feet a little bit, and so there's bitterness to this day among Israelis and some Israelis, some pro-Israelis toward Kissinger for the restraint that he imposed on Israel. I took a different view. I thought he was a great man. I think he was a great supporter of Israel, one of the greatest. I made the case. I won't go through the whole case here, but Kissinger liked the article and invited me up to New York to interview him on film about it. And I got to his office. I got all mic'd up. The camera was all ready to go. And then I got a call on his from his cell phone. He was at home, and he said he wasn't feeling well. The doctor told him not to come in, and we'll do it some other time. But apparently, we will not be doing that, Gadi. I'm very, very saddened. He's a big hero of mine. I think he's a genius, and like I say, I think he's a great supporter of Israel and a great defender of the American interest.
One more comparison, which I think should be made, because the current Secretary of State may be on a similar kind of mission, though in my opinion in the wrong context. Israelis remember Kissinger for stopping them from smashing the Egyptian army, because Kissinger calculated that if Sadat can tell his country that he had a limited victory over Israel and reached a kind of tie at the end, then he would be more amenable to the possibility of making peace with Israel later. As your article shows, he was not ready for peace immediately after the war, let alone before the war, as some historiographers have suggested. He wasn't, but it took some time, and you explain it in your article, until he reached that conclusion. But Kissinger helped maneuver him there. And so people say now, is Tony Blinken not doing the same? He's going to prevent Israel from completely defeating Hamas in order to create some balance after it and reach a ceasefire, which if Kissinger enraged some Israelis at 73, if Blinken tries to do that, he will enrage all Israeli, apart from a few writers in Haaretz.
Yes, the difference here, if I can just defend Kissinger a little bit, because the case for Kissinger being the greatest supporter of Israel ever is that his strategy worked. He did restrain Israel. He did want something of a balance, but he wanted a balance with Israel having an advantage in order to pull Egypt from the Soviet Union toward the United States. That was the goal all along from the very beginning, and he succeeded. That's the thing. That's what happened. If Blinken believes, and I don't know what Blinken believes, but I don't believe he's a great strategist like Kissinger. But if he believes that leaving Hamas in place in some way is going to lead it to make a deal with Israel, that a lasting deal. He's sadly mistaken. What I think he thinks is that Israel defeating Hamas will create an opportunity to make a lasting deal with the Palestinian
Authority. So if we had a real comparison with Kissinger, what Kissinger achieved in the end is kicking the Soviets out of the region and reducing their influence. And if any of Blinken's strategies get to kicking Iran out of the region,
no, that
is not even an aim of his.
That is the big, by the way, that is the big difference. And that is why I wrote the article. The article came out just before the October 7th, and so it looked a little prescient because of all the comparisons between October 7 and 73. I have to say I didn't see this surprise coming. But what I did see, and that's why I wrote the article, is that we're going back to a world in which the structure of international politics is similar to what it was back then, where the United States has great power rivals who are going to use the Arab-Israeli conflict to undermine the American system. And so we need to think clearly about what's the role of the U.S.-Israeli alliance in that great power competition. And that's a competition between the United States on the one hand and Russia, China, and Iran on the other. Unfortunately, these guys do not have that vision at all. These guys being the guys in the White House.
Yeah, apparently America's big power rivals are thinking about this far more clearly than the Biden administration. Will mention that it keeps releasing money for Iran by bypassing the sanctions, if not outright canceling them. We will stay with the Yom Kippur War in a way, because the Yom Kippur War is taught in schools of military intelligence worldwide, along with Pearl Harbor and the Operation Barbarossa, as cases in which the intelligence failed colossally and ended up with disaster. In the case of the Yom Kippur, is very familiar to Israelis. It's also familiar to you, Mike. We had a long discussion about the word mechdal, which is a faux pas, which is, why don't you define it, as you researched it enough?
The two best simple definitions of mechdal. First of all, as you know, Israelis call the 1973 war, they call it ha-mechdal, with the mechdal, and but the word mechdal, you want to translate it into English, is basically blunder or fuck up, if you want to be cruder. But what it actually means, there's no perfect translation, because it means an act of negligence that had a very, very serious and damaging consequence. So you can, it's not just an act of negligence. So sometimes it gets translated as negligence, but it's negligence that leads to very bad consequences.
Cause great damage. And the other word, we'll not get into another disquisition on that, is because it's understandable to English speakers, is conceptia, the conception. The problem is that the military intelligence of Israel, after the 6 days war, which was the lightning victory, calculated that the Arabs would not dare attack us again, and therefore classified all information to the contrary as in another narrative. For example, the idea that all these preparations for war were just a maneuver for training. The same thing happened with Operation Barbarossa, as we know. I wrote a seminar in my BA studies about why the Foreign Office of Britain failed to see Barbarossa coming.
You wrote a paper.
Paper?
Yeah. It's a seminar is when people
we call it a seminar paper.
Yeah.
And I was given the whole archive of the Northern Department of the Foreign Office, and that's not a fair thing to do to a student for a first degree, because, as you know, Mike, as a historian, as I know now as a professor, it gives you the illusion that you're touching the truth, and sometimes you don't understand the context. But once you read about the context, you realize that there was a conception in Britain as well as in Russia that Hitler would not open another front before he's done with the West, because that's what caused Germany's defeat in World War I. So it couldn't be.
Right.
So the whole thing was diplomatic pressure. And so there were 200 divisions on the Russian border, and the more it mounted, they said the greater the diplomatic pressure he's trying to apply. Because 2 million soldiers. Imagine having to feed 2 million. So the same went with Israel, and regrettably, this is not just note that this massacre happens 50 years and a day symbolically after the Yom Kippur surprise attack of 1973, and apparently this time, once again, all the information was in the hands of the IDF. So with the help of our friend Elizabeth Rimini, we translated for you a kind of collage from Israeli media of the reports about what intelligence we did and did not have on the eve of October 7. Let's watch.
נגדת מוערכת שמצליחה להגיע במהלך הדרך אל התוכנית המבצעית של חמאס כפי שהתממשה ב7 באוקטובר. עם המידע הזה היא הולכת לא רק לקצין בכיר בפיקוד הדרום, אלא גם למפקד 8200. בסוד העניין היא מכניסה גם את המפקד הישיר שלה, הוא נרעש מן הממצאים הללו, שבועות בודדים לפני ההתקפה, הוא מבטל חופשה עם משפחתו באילת, כי הוא שומע שראש אמ"ן מגיע לביקור בבסיס שלהם, והוא חייב להציג לו את הממצאים.
General Haliva at INSS saying that he expects to have 5 years of quiet on the Gaza border. And then he catches himself and he says, it's my job to think of other, to think of ideas that contradict our conception, but he doesn't. He's so clear about this, and no head of intelligence, of Israeli intelligence, should ever allow himself to even think this way, because he sounds exactly like General Zaira in 1970. General Zaira, his predecessor, who's still alive, is in his 90s. He's still arguing that he didn't get it wrong, General Zaira. It is amazing. It is amazing. I mean, I feel sorry for the guy. I really do. But he's going to go down in history with General Zaira, I'm afraid to say.
That's not the general sentiment in Israel about this guy at the moment. And there's another clip going around which we didn't.
It's not it's not the general sentiment.
The general sentiment is that he will have to go. Yeah.
No, that's what I'm saying.
No, but I was referring to you feeling sorry for him. I was saying not everybody feels sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe yeah, okay.
You are a soft-hearted goy. We Jews are very tough.
Soft-hearted goy.
So there's another clip of Haliva going around in which he explains, and this is also going to come back and bite him, and already does. He said he was sitting with the prime minister, and he gave his intelligence assessment, and the prime minister said, "I disagree with you." And he said, "Well, Mr. Prime Minister, that's just your opinion, but my opinion is based on hundreds of experts who analyze this material, so it's not just my opinion."
He's General Zaira again. It's amazing. They're good. It really is amazing.
So let's say a word about what the conception is. The conception was, and it's now they're trying to pin it on Netanyahu, because the press in Israel is as hostile to Netanyahu as the mainstream press is hostile to Trump in the United States.
By the way, it's not just the press. There's a significant segment of the Israeli national security establishment which holds Bibi primarily responsible.
Absolutely, and it's not that they're not an interested party in this. So it's also very convenient to him. But what is the conception? The conception was that, and this was also the Bennett-Lapid government. So there's a continuation. That the conception was, and this is what Haliva relies on, is that Hamas will not give up the advantages of economic cooperation with Israel. So as long as we supply these people with work and we help keep the Gazan economy afloat, the Hamas will never risk losing all that for a war that it can't win. And I have to say, we were outsmarted. But now there's not only these snippets of intelligence that were mentioned in this collage. Ayala Hasson, who is probably among the handful of most important investigative journalists in Israel, she has a show on Channel 11, got hold of a PowerPoint presentation called, chillingly, The Wall of Jericho. As you remember, the Wall of Jericho was toppled by Joshua bin Nun, surrounding it with the people of Israel 7 times, and then it fell. So this completely turns things on its head with some, I don't know, military imagination, and it showed a very detailed knowledge of what the Hamas plan was. Again, rejected by head of national intelligence. We have to say, General Khaliva is the head of the IDF intelligence, but in Israel, the head of the IDF intelligence is also the national director of intelligence. So he's responsible for synthesizing all intelligence. So let's take a look at a part from Ayala Hasson's expose.
הערב אני מפרסמת לראשונה לא על נגדית מ-8200 שכתבה מיילים, אלא על דבר קיומה של מצגת דרמטית שהוכנה באוגדת עזה, על ידי המודיעין של האוגדה, והסתמך על שורה של אמצעים. שם המצגת בעצמו דרמטי, חומת יריחו, התוכנית לשבירת מערך אוגדת עזה, הצגה לראש אמ"ן. המצגת הזו הוצגה לראש אמ"ן חליבה במאי 2022.
Absolutely chilling. And for the dumbest takes on the news, Mike, I'll start, because I want to basically stay on the same topic. I printed out a story about the, what do you call it, commander of Southern Theater. Theater is a bit big.
I think you just say Southern Commander is what we say.
Southern Command. So he's the commander of the south of Israel, and he's also a general, one rank below the chief of staff. His name is Yaron Finkelman, and obviously he's one of those to be held responsible, because this was not just an intelligence failure. Where were the forces? The infrastructure. Why did they reduce readiness around Gaza to such thin numbers? So this guy now discovered that some of the soldiers in Gaza were spraying graffiti on Gazan walls. And part of these graffitis were, Ben Gvir was right, sorry. So, people are moving to the right, but it's also army humor. These are soldiers and they're in a tough environment.
I saw a lot of that graffiti. Some of it was just support for their favorite football teams.
Yeah, but then General Finkelman said that this is not the Tzahal way. This is not the IDF's way. And he sent them to erase the graffiti, which also risks their lives. And this is not just incredibly dumb. It's not exactly a take on the news, but it's such an amazing misunderstanding, not only of the mood, but also of the problem. Because part of the conceptia, Israel, Mike, is always criticized for violating the rules of war, despite the fact that Israel's army takes more care than any other army and has an enemy which promotes the death of its own civilians as a tool of propaganda, to which the West regrettably cooperates. So the problem, part of the problem, and Israelis are saying that, it reached when Gantz said, I'm going to risk my soldier in order to save civilian lives on the other side. People said, wait a minute, why? Why are you risking our soldiers to save them? They are the enemy. But what happened to the IDF is that seminar after seminar in progressive universities in America, in Israel, in the press, with the pressure of the courts, Haaretz and its moralizing journalism, the IDF has lost the killer instinct and replace it with an image of himself as Mother Teresa. And as I think I quoted a comedian said in Israel, who said in Israel that the IDF is the most moral army in the world because it's the only one in the competition. Armies should not compete for being moral. They should compete for effectiveness in winning wars. And coming from General Yaron Finkelman, it's all the more annoying because you are responsible for what happened. We stopped shooting and the perimeter near the Gaza border under your command. This excessive moralizing has led to a situation, as we saw in the intelligence survey, that Hamas understood that it was eroding our guard by provoking us, and because we are so moral, we did not respond. And so now, after this is supposed to weigh on your conscience in some way, you're still in that old way of thinking, sending soldiers to erase graffiti as if the beauty of Gaza ruins is more important than their lives.
I have a slight disagreement with you, but we'll talk about this later at some other time because it's all about managing the great power of the United States. But we'll for another time. I'm going to move to my take now. Or again, not a take on the news, but just the dumbest thing this week. I'm gonna the dumb thing that caught my eye. You know that a reporter yesterday, that's Wednesday morning in Israel, reported that a Israeli boy who was held hostage for 50 days, for nearly 50 days in Gaza, was held in the home of a teacher from UNRWA. That's the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. That's the UN agency that provides all the education for Palestinians in Gaza. Hamas doesn't provide education with all the millions that it gets from Qatar and elsewhere. It lets the UN do that, but it has enormous influence over the UN facilities, and basically, effectively, it controls them from indirectly. And so a teacher, an UNRWA teacher, held this boy. Hamas gave the teacher the boy, and he held him in his attic and starved him for nearly 50 days. On the same day, that evening, the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres. Hold on here 1 second. I've lost the link to Guterres. I want to read you what Guterres wrote. It's amazing. Guterres tweeted, "There are numerous accounts of sexual violence during the abhorrent acts of terror by Hamas on 7 October that must be vigorously investigated and prosecuted. Gender-based violence must be condemned anytime, anywhere." Now, Guterres has been a very, very harsh critic of Israel and accused Israel of excessive violence in Gaza, and has never addressed the October 7 atrocities by Hamas. So he finally discovers that maybe, just maybe, there were some rapes. That has to be investigated, because he says here there are numerous accounts of sexual violence. They're not well-documented accounts, just numerous accounts. He discovers it on the same day that it comes out that an UNRWA teacher was holding an Israeli boy hostage. Is that just a coincidence? I don't think it's just a coincidence. And it just shows you how cynical these guys are.
Yeah, and of course, UNRWA is part of his organization. It's part.
Yes, that's the point. His organization has now been implicated. An organization under his authority has been implicated in holding Israelis hostage, and so he discovered that maybe, just maybe, Hamas did something wrong on October 7th. It's amazing. It's really amazing.
It is. we have been ever since this show aired. I'll call it a show, okay, or
Sure.
podcast came online. We have been careful in being explicit about atrocities because we understand some of them are so horrible that some people just shut down. You don't want to impose this on our viewers. But Mike, I'll tell you now, I didn't tell you off air or off internet that I've had a testimony from the Knesset by an officer of our police, a woman that testified before the Knesset, the parliament, about the details about the atrocities. And I was thinking what we could do to go about it. And here's my thought. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. Why don't we put that at the end of one of our shows so that anyone who wants to avoid it, because it's.
Why don't we just put a link to it? It's on the internet.
Yeah, but we have a copy that Elizabeth translated for us. So we have it in English now. So we can either put it at the end of a show or separately on the channel with a trigger warning. You know, I'm not squeamish about triggers.
Let's put it separately on the and just say anyone who wants to. Yeah, and then we can tweet it out and everything too. I have such mixed feelings about these things. Anyway, for me
it's some of it you can't get out of your head later and you can't sleep. It's just
I don't like to but there's a lot of clips on the internet that of terrible things happening in Gaza, terrible things that happen to Israelis. There's something in me that doesn't like to talk about it. I know we need to be aware of it and we need to discuss it. But I don't like.
I strongly disagree
like to
with
stay.
you. I strongly disagree with you here because I think we have a moral obligation to know what happened. We have a moral obligation to do it.
I agree with that. I agree with you 100% on that. I don't. To me, the actual. I like to stay one step removed from it, knowing, but not.
So this is exactly the kind of clip, because this is a verbal report by a police officer to the Knesset. Still, it's very hard to listen to.
I heard her report. It is still some of the descriptions of the graphic violence are
hard.
Even in her very sterile, factual representation, it's very hard to take.
So that's all from us for today. Thanks for watching. And since this is Thursday now, we'll be with you at what is for Americans the end of the week, right? Sunday, for the next episode of Israel Update. Thanks for watching.